Okay, so welcome everybody. Happy to have everybody with us for this exciting discussion. We're really fortunate to have this incredible panel and to get their point of view on some of the topics that we're going to discuss. So I'll start by saying I'm Lori Roth. I'm the National Managing Partner of Prager Metis. We're a full-service accounting and advisory firm, and I'm very active with the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, so I thank them for inviting me to be a part of this. It's very exciting. And then I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves. So want to start with Dave?
Yeah, I'm Dave Rousseau. I had a long 27-year career in state government that ended in 2010. I was John Corzine's treasurer from 2008 and 2009. I had the distinct pleasure of serving the last time we had a massive economic recession. And prior to that, I worked for the legislature and two other governors on fiscal policy in the state. And I look forward to a robust discussion this morning with my two successors.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, Andrew?
I'm Andrew Sidamon-Eristoff. I served as Governor Christie's treasurer from 2010 to 2015. Most of my background was in New York City and New York State, but I'm currently in New Jersey and looking forward to today's panel.
Thanks. Ford?
Yeah, so I'm Ford Scudder. I served as treasurer following Andrew during Governor Christie's administration, so from late 2015 until the administration ended in early 2018. Prior to that, I had a kind of broad macroeconomic and financial services background. And I'm now at Guggenheim Partners. Was working in Manhattan until March and have not been in New York since, but I work on our infrastructure team trying to find infrastructure assets to invest in for our clients.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. I guess we'll just jump right in, and I would like to start by asking you, based on your experiences and your experience specifically with New Jersey and fiscal issues, if we could each talk about a few opportunities and risks that New Jersey should be considering based on the current state of affairs and possible things that we should be planning for in the future. So I guess we'll keep on going in the same order and start with Dave.
Well, I think that, if we had been doing this panel last December, all of us would have a different view on what is going on. All the audience that's watching this would have a different view on where the world's at, what the future holds. I mean, I believe that look, this is unprecedented. All of us have dealt with fiscal issues in the past, but they were fiscal issues that were driven by a recession. This is a healthcare issue that drove the recession, and that's a whole different ball game. And as we come out of this, we're going to come out of this differently than we did in the past recessions. How people work, where they work, and is going to be completely different now. Not just because of health concerns in the future, but people are going to realize that we can work differently. And with this will be some opportunities. There'll be opportunities in the real estate market. There'll be for people moving, wanting to locate to some of the old abandoned office parks, Chubb and Warren, wherever Chubb is, Warren Township, I think it is. Places like that will now that were white elephants now may become prime real estate. And we just need to be careful on policies that we make that allowed us to at least nurture some of these opportunities that come by and not push them away. Clearly, the three of us, two of our people here come from, the Republican Party. I came from a Democratic governor. I consider myself more of a conservative Democrat. But the policies that our leaders choose, though, will help shape what goes on. I mean, the business community will have a different view on what. I mean, clearly, this governor wants to keep investments in education, things like growing the economy, a fair and strong economy, which may conflict at times with the business community. But I think we need to figure out how to find that middle ground on where to nurture these opportunities that will come up. I think we'll get more into depth, but I think that's more of a general comment.
Right. No, I think that's valid. I think maybe we should focus a little bit, or start by focusing a little bit on the opportunities. Andrew, I know that we were talking a little bit about this as far as, specifically the real estate opportunities that might exist, and maybe you could share with us some of your thoughts.
Thank you. I mean, I agree with what Dave has said. The COVID-induced recession and the pandemic generally has really uncovered what was an underlying trend that is now sort of out and notorious. And that is that the nature of work, as Dave noted, has changed, is changing, has been changing for quite a long time. And I don't think we're ever going to return to the pre-pandemic paradigm. There are a lot of New Jersey residents who formerly commuted 5 days a week into New York City, Manhattan, who will probably go there 2 or 3 days a week instead. And that represents, I think, a series of opportunities. Dave alluded to the fact that we have a lot of unused, office parks and other kinds of space that was developed in the 80s that is now hasn't been in fashion for a while, but maybe they will come back into fashion as an option for businesses that want to create a formal presence in New Jersey for their New Jersey resident employees. That leads me to a related issue, which is taxation. Right now, the legislature and the governor are grappling with the problem that much of the income that is earned by New Jerseyans, especially in North Jersey, is actually taxed by New York. And that the background is that New York has imposes tax on the earnings of New Jersey residents who work in New York City. However, under the pandemic, there's a very strong argument to be made that since many New Jersey office workers, resident office workers, have not even been able to go to Manhattan, have been explicitly told not to go into Manhattan during the pandemic, maybe they ought to be paying tax to New Jersey and not New York. This is a huge issue. I've seen various estimates, really between $1 billion and $2 billion a year at stake, across the two states. And that's a fiscal opportunity. We can somehow work to reconfigure the way we tax interstate commutation and work, telecommuting work. I think that could be an opportunity. So getting back to where I started, under New York's rule, which is commonly known as the convenience of the employer test, if an employer maintains a bona fide place of business where an employee is assigned out of state, then that state should and has the right to collect withholding tax and impose tax. So it may be that there's an opportunity for New Jersey now to welcome the establishment of businesses that are going to be needing a kind of home base in New Jersey for their New Jersey resident taxpayers. And I know I'm getting all tripped up, but there is an opportunity in there, I think, for New Jersey in the medium and long term.
I agree. I think that's a big opportunity. You probably have another perspective for it from your before and after what you're doing now. So what are your thoughts related to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly, as Dave and Andrew both pointed out, there was this ongoing trend of, prior to the pandemic, of shifting of a suburban migration. And this has just accelerated that. And we also had people working from home prior to the pandemic, and this has accelerated that. And so that creates a larger fiscal opportunity on the tax side. Obviously a lot of legal and political machinations that we need to go through before we're able to realize that. But it does absolutely create an opportunity from the fiscal side to really help start to jumpstart a process to put us on sound fiscal footing. I think there's a risk, obviously, that it's just kind of business as usual in Trenton, and we use any found revenue to fund a new program rather than using it to delever our budget. But between the potential new revenue from New York, the potential for this suburban migration to at least put a temporary halt to what has been persistent net domestic out migration from New Jersey for over 30 years. Those are huge potential positives that we should try to kind of, when we have the wind at our back, use them. And at the same time, as kind of borrowing the Rahm Emanuel phrase, never let a good crisis go to waste, we have the opportunity due to the pandemic to really stop and say, okay, let's look at the budget as a whole. What structural issues do we need to fix? Because, as all of us had to deal with, there are significant structural issues in the New Jersey budget that have been addressed to a certain degree over the years, but a lot of times just the can kicked down the road. And so if you're able to use this as a reset and put us on a stronger path forward, where we are kind of economically competitive and desirable location across the Northeast corridor, that would be a huge opportunity. Now, I have tremendous doubts about whether we will operate in that fashion, but it is an opportunity.
No, I agree, and I think it kind of segues us a little bit into another topic and how we can, kind of take this opportunity to look at it two ways, right? So obviously there's two sides to the equation. We're all accountants at heart, I guess, and the budget has two sides, right? It has the revenue side and the spending side. So while this is an opportunity probably on the revenue side that has other influences with the New York laws and regulations and things like that, we would have to work all that out, and our audience here is primarily like New Jersey business owners, right? So I think that maybe there's a way to look at this from the corporate level, and as you mentioned, with businesses moving out of New Jersey, this is maybe an opportunity for some to move in to accommodate their employees and things like that, given the new landscape. So, but maybe we could talk a little bit on the expense side if you think that there's opportunities that exist at this point too.
I guess for just following up a little bit, just to close out this last conversation. Yeah, I mean, we're going to get, whether it's from economic growth, from people moving into the state, business moving into the state, whether it's the New York taxation issue, we're going to get more revenue into the state that isn't going to raise anybody's taxes in here. It's going to just be more revenue that's going to come into the state. And I think I agree with Ford. We have to find what that sweet spot is about which portion of that revenue is used to expand programs that need to be expanded, even though the business community would probably supports expansion of preschool throughout the state, but also to then fix some of our structural issues. The one thing that I think none of us have done a good job about is none of us really, for both the business community and the public, none of us really do a good job of explaining really how New Jersey spends its money. We all forget that most of the money in New Jersey is not being spent by the state government. It's being spent by K through 12 and local governments. I mean, I think the numbers are roughly $100 million is spent by by government in New Jersey, and remember, the bureaucracy of Trenton is only around $4 billion. I mean, one of the things to keep in mind is that New Jersey government, people say run it like a business. Well, we give out 75% of all of our money to somebody else, whether it's a school district, a municipality, a college, a hospital, wherever we give it out. If anybody in the audience runs a business that gives away 75% of its money, it's not going to be in business that long. So we have to do a better job of educating people. We have to do a better job of the idea that we can solve all of our problems by getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. if waste, fraud, and abuse that existed out there, it's a substantial amount of money, don't you think that the three of us and our bosses that were governors would have taken care of that? It's just, I once in a press conference said, it's just BS to think that we're going to balance our budgets on waste, fraud, and abuse. But there are opportunities. There are definitely opportunities, on our, really, I think the biggest opportunity out there, I'm not just sure if there's as much of an opportunity on pensions, because it really means moving a complete paradigm shift to a 401k type system, which I'm not sure the public employees in New Jersey will ever go for. But there are opportunities on health benefits, and there's really are clearly opportunities out there in local government. Some of the things that came out of Path for Progress about having every district be a K through 12 district, looking at regionalizing police forces and things like that. But I think that we need to do a better job, as a state, or as some think tank out there, about educating the public on what state government really does. The bureaucracy of state government is roughly $4 billion in salaries.
I agree with Dave that, much of the opportunity lies in the benefit space. I tend to be more focused on pensions than perhaps you are, Dave. I think that there's a lot of room there, although the politics are very, very challenging. I concede that. There is much more running room on the benefits, health benefits side. And we don't lack for, serious proposals. The Senate president has had proposals. Other groups have come up with proposals. And, one has to ask, if you're observing this process year after year after year, if not now, when? When are we going to bite the bullet and reform our health benefits system? Instead, under this current governor, and I don't want to stray out of the lines here, but instead our current governor reached an agreement with the labor unions, basically vitiating a major reform that we had achieved during the Christie administration, which was to have employers and employees share, have premium sharing, share in the cost of premiums on a percentage basis. So now we're back to an old paradigm where, frankly, employees don't have a set of incentives that are aligned with employers, like government public employers here in New York State, in New Jersey. So that's a problem. Getting back to the issue of tax, much has been said about the fact that there's very little that New Jersey can do to force New York to take a more permissive position, because the only real, the main sort of a variable here is the extent to which New Jersey is willing to provide a credit for taxes paid to New York State. And if we could, in theory, deny that credit or reduce it, that will only hurt New Jersey residents. So that's why I think, going back to an earlier discussion, I think that if we can have some careful thinking about ways to incent businesses to move a part of their operations to New Jersey sufficient to meet New York's standard, that would really be a game changer. But the problem is, for businesses, we'd be asking them to make a change for the benefit of their employees, or actually for the benefit of New Jersey, really, as opposed to their own immediate benefit. And many employees end up paying more or less the same amount between the two states, right? So that to me says, okay, maybe somebody ought to think up a targeted incentive that at the price of, for instance, a small amount of revenue loss in a tax incentive to business would actually generate additional personal income tax in New Jersey, right? But we have to think of it in terms of it as an opportunity rather than, just sort of beat our breast and complain. And, I just don't know that the legislature is doing anything productive in looking at this issue.
Okay.
It's a fair point. There are ways that it can benefit the employer as well. Obviously, rent in Midtown Manhattan is a lot more than in suburban New Jersey. And it also can benefit the employees from the standpoint of, let's say a firm puts a satellite office in, say Woodbridge to be kind of, central in New Jersey. It's a lot easier to drive there than it is to get into Midtown Manhattan from just about anywhere somebody's commuting from right now. So there are benefits. Plus, you add in kind of the reluctance to use public transportation in the wake of the pandemic, and it can be sensible on a lot of levels.
Mm-hmm. Fair point.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I also think that, some of these things do become benefits to both sides, right? So, and it really is attracting businesses to New Jersey as leases come up and things like that. So, I think there could be benefits to the employees and benefits to the business and benefits to the state. I think that, some of the affordability issues in New Jersey might even be worse in New York. So that might help us. Hopefully that is an opportunity for us as well.
But remember, these are people who have already chosen to live in New Jersey. The employees have already chosen to live in New Jersey at all. It's whether it's it's Andrew said, it's going to be what is the cost of major New York entity that doesn't have a New Jersey location already. They may already have a New Jersey location, and all they need to do now is basically change the place of work. For instead of David Rousseau getting a paycheck from company X located in Manhattan, let's say that they already have a Woodbridge location. All they've got to do is shift over and say that my primary place of work will now be Woodbridge. That seems to be the easier one for people, for some of these larger presences that have a presence in both both states. So incentivizing somebody who doesn't have a location already here is the issue.
Yeah, and but it needs to be kind of a holistic discussion, because as Laurie just noted, there are major employers in New York City that are kind of locked into long-term leases. Mm-hmm. And so when they're doing their calculus about how they're going to, manage their space, there are many, many, many variables. I just think that New Jersey has an opportunity, a rare opportunity, to kind of put together almost like a SWAT team to really look almost at a case-by-case level to facilitate this transition in a way that works for everyone, including New Jersey's taxpayers.
And I think that what we've talked about, Andrew talked about at the beginning, that if this was a $50 to $100 million issue, not that isn't a lot of money, but it's instead of a $40 billion state budget, it's not. We're talking about $1 billion to $2 billion issue. So the state should be willing to invest time, effort, legal resources. And again, that $1 billion to $2 billion means that if we're trying to fund schools, we don't have to fund it with another tax increase. We're trying to fund it's free. It's free money to us. It's not, there's no policy implications. For that amount of money, there should be that. And look, nothing against, I don't try not to criticize the current administration as much as possible, but I'm not sure if back in March they folded too soon on basically just saying, agreeing that the convenience thing would, not fighting the convenience thing, just basically putting regs. It wasn't regs, it was guidance out there that basically said, for now, maybe they thought it was only going to be a month or two. That could also be a part. But we have people who haven't been in Manhattan since March. So for this calendar year, three quarters of their time is basically going to be spent in New Jersey versus Manhattan.
Well, there is, as you know, litigation between New Hampshire and Massachusetts on a very similar set of issues. And at the very least, I think New Jersey ought to consider whether it should intervene in that litigation, because it would clarify some of the issues for New Jersey, like for New Jersey's taxpayers. But I haven't seen any affirmative action on that either.
Right. So, I mean, I guess we've talked around the health crisis a little bit here, and obviously we're in the middle of an unprecedented, that word keeps getting thrown around, but it really is an unprecedented health crisis. And it's led to an unprecedented budget crisis, really. So, you know, there's talk both ways on whether this is the time to tax and spend more to stimulate the economy, and others are saying that, you know, the downturn of the economy is a time to look for efficiencies, some structural reforms, you know, things like that. And I guess I just ask each of you, what do you think are the best practices that we should be considering at this time? And why? Are there things that we should be avoiding? You know.
Well, I think from a just high level standpoint, I would actually say from the outset, Dave, Andrew, and I all spoke, and a number of other, you know, fiscal kind of alumni, and tried to estimate, you know, how big a problem was this going to be. And I would say almost without exception, the revenue loss has been smaller than any of us really predicted. I think, you know, Dave and Andrew had to work through, in percentage terms, possibly even in dollar terms, but certainly in percentage terms, a much larger problem in the financial crisis than we're dealing with right now, at least if there's not a major respike here that causes additional shutdowns and additional revenue loss. So yes, the pandemic itself is unprecedented. However, the kind of very fast federal response and response from the Fed really opened up kind of hiring and credit markets faster than I think people thought in the depths of March. And so the kind of response in rehiring and personal income and things like that, while not all the way back, was much faster than anticipated. And you've seen that in terms of, you know, initially the governor was saying we might have a $40 billion budget hole across two budget cycles. And I would guess it's probably going to be a tenth of that at this point. So the numbers have come in and come in and come in, and we'll see where that ends up. You know, from a best practices standpoint, you know, the cow's out of the barn, if you will, on the Supreme Court decision and the borrowing for operating. Obviously, that was not something that either the Corzine or Christie administration engaged in. You know, there wasn't a quote unquote emergency at the time necessarily that would have allowed for that based upon the Supreme Court decision. But one major risk that I do see from a moral hazard standpoint is the Supreme Court decision. In particular, for two reasons: that there were just no guardrails around what the definition of emergency is, and what bond proceeds can be used, what spending the bond proceeds can be used for. And to me, that creates a major problem in the sense that, you know, if it's just Trenton business as usual, someday down the road when we have a major budget problem, I envision a governor arguing, you know, we have a $2 billion budget hole, that's an emergency because we can't cut school aid, and so I'm going to go issue bonds again. And that just the moral hazard there to me is scary. And so it's time to get the budget in order so that we don't go down that path.
Well, as you noted earlier, Ford, you know, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. The situation is a little bit obscured because we had this extension of one fiscal year and then the adoption of the next fiscal year in October. But, you know, when you clear away all the smoke, what's really happening is that the state borrowed $4 billion just yesterday, or the day before yesterday, borrowed just over $4 billion to maintain spending levels, which actually will represent an increase over fiscal 20.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Not only over fiscal 20, but actually over what was initially in the fiscal 21 budget message, which is just amazing.
Fair enough. And Dave, you'll have a chance to respond in a second. So, but so we borrow money to do two things: to continue a spending increase on into the next fiscal year, and to pump up a budget surplus, which I think was really inappropriate, because I mean, I don't understand how you can use debt proceeds as surplus. It just doesn't really make sense to me. And I think this administration knowingly underestimated revenues for fiscal 21, frankly, to set up some good news for fiscal 22 when the governor happens to be up for re-election, right? So you're going to see a steady month after month, series of press releases and news stories saying revenues are higher than expected, higher than budgeted. Never mind that, we now have an additional $4.2 billion worth of general obligation debt on the books. And, that is due in, I think, 13 years. Principal payments are not due for another 3 years. So it's going to be the next governor or governors who will deal with this, long after the current crowd is in the rearview mirror.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, kind of in terms of not learning from the past, I mean, these bonds were also issued like the pension obligation bonds as uncallable, which, if there's another federal program where the state gets $2 billion, then we didn't need to borrow $4 billion, and we're going to be on the hook for that principal and interest for another 12 years.
Yeah, but Ford, we've got this wonderful surplus.
Well, I think going back to I think back in March, April, when all of us were doing email, we think the governor was going too high? Yeah. But did we ever think it'd be down around the $4 to $5 billion number? Probably not. Because remember, 8, 9, and 10, it was a Wall Street down recession, basically. And this was we all were wondering, is this going to be a Main Street up? And it never passed Main Street. I mean, I still remember sitting in my basement having CNN on one day when Chairman Powell put out a statistic that 40% of the people making under $40,000 were unemployed at that point in time. And it never really went above that. But the fact that, as Ford said, the federal government stepped in, clearly not enough money to the states for what they needed, but they stepped in for individuals to keep their income, in fact, increase their income in some instances, put the PPP program in for businesses, which allowed people's disposable income wasn't impacted. And that's why we didn't see, yes, we saw some drop in the sales tax early on because people weren't going out. But by the time April came around and you on a weekend, you went to a Home Depot or a Lowe's or whatever, those places' parking lots were packed. And I think that when we all talked about it back then, we all knew that there was some sweet spot on what the mix of what was. Federal relief being part of it, tax increases probably being part of it. 4 pieces really: spending constraints, basically eliminating places where you were going to grow spending and saying, wait a minute, we can't do that this year. And then some actual spending cuts. And truthfully, that's how we did it in 8 and 9. I will admit, and and Andrew did it in subsequent years. Did we sort of do some borrowing? Yes, we sort of did some borrowing because we decided not to put money into our pension payment. In 2009, we had $1 billion that was supposed to go into the pension system, and we knew all along that was a surplus for us in an emergency, and we never made that payment. And then we didn't start making payments again until whenever the Christie administration started, which is a different type of borrowing. And this administration could have chose to do that instead of going to the market with a hard debt. And yes, and I will agree. I definitely agree with Ford that we should have at least first gone to the federal market facility if we needed cash flow issues, which I don't think we needed cash flow right now, to use hoping that come February or March, we get more federal money and we could have immediately paid it off. That is not there. I would say, though, that part of the method of the madness of increasing the surplus was that I always preached that you couldn't look at this just as a fiscal 20 issue, a fiscal 21 issue. You needed both policy-wise and politically to look at this through fiscal year 22. And the fact that, that this budget is now based on $5 billion of non-recurring revenue, roughly. The fact that, last night I was on a phone call and we were trying to place a bet on the over-under. Will the surplus be over or under 3.5 billion? Not the 2.5 billion that the governor certified. That extra surplus will be a cushion for fiscal year 22. And yes, and the political calendar shows that, what is when they're doing the fiscal 22 budget next, when the governor proposes it in February and the legislature does it in next June, what is that? That is what's the calendar show? It shows they're all up for election in 22 in November of next year. So clearly, look, all of us will agree. None of us will disagree that politics does not enter into any of the decisions that we or our bosses made. Anybody who's on this call would be naive to think that the calendar and things like that. So, I think there was a method to that madness, but this administration clearly made the decision to just use federal money and borrowing, not even willing to pull back some of the spending growth, let alone look at. And I just want to circle back on one of the areas we talked about earlier on opportunities. And as I was just sitting here as I looked across at the state capitol, I was thinking an opportunity that the government should not ignore at this time is the changing way of delivering of people working should follow to government as well.
That's true. Very good point.
As treasurers, one of our roles was we manage the state's real estate portfolio. Well, just like businesses may not need as much space anymore, the state government may not need as much space anymore if they move to employees working off-site more, or if they realize that technology has allowed through attrition in the managers that we can start making reductions in some areas of state government. And it may be a lot of areas, like maybe areas of support staff. People working at home now are working without a lot of their support staff that we have in state government. State government needs to look at it the same way. This is where I will say that we can be a business. State government needs to look at this the same way businesses do on where we locate our employees, whether or not we need as much space, which is cost in there to deal with that.
I completely agree.
I also think that, what Andrew said before is part of looking at it that way is also an employee contribution to their benefits, which is how it is in the world everywhere, really.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, there is a contribution, but it was shifted from the reform that Andrew and Governor Christie made was that it's a percentage of your premium, which was the only way that we were able to have constructive conversations about how do we still deliver high quality healthcare but remove some of the cost, because then that would also flow to the employee's pocketbook. Now that it's back to percentage of payroll, there's no incentive on the union side to say we just want the most expensive platinum plan possible. But to piggyback on what Dave was saying, I completely agree. There are certainly ways to modernize the state workforce in light of this. It's just a lot more difficult from a public employer than for a private employer. One, our IT resources, as we all know, are incredibly, let's just say, strained. And two, when you just have, there just aren't the same carrots and sticks for public employees as for private employees to ensure that those going to work from home are remaining productive. It's a much more difficult proposition. I don't disagree. We should figure out how to do, there should be time spent figuring out how to do it. It's just incredibly difficult.
Right. So one of the other things that we had talked about in our conversation was, about some kind of structural reforms that will address some of the affordability issues. So, we have a Senate president who, is trying to address some of these things and maybe meeting with some resistance, but, he has this path to progress to address some of the New Jersey high costs. And, if you think that's the way, or, what your thoughts are related to that.
Well, look, path for progress, I commend the Senate president and everybody who's involved in that. Path for progress, there is virtually nothing new in Path for Progress. I'm not saying there's a negative, that hadn't been in some other report at some other time in the last. I've been in state government since 1981. I've been in, since 87. I've been still doing fiscal issues. So I mean, everything there was nothing new. It was just it's a matter of people having the leadership and and guts to do some of these things. And some of them are easy. Some of them, getting everybody to be a K through 12 school district. In 2008, John Corzine signed a law that basically said there shall be no more. You shall all be K through 12. We're 12 years later, and it hasn't happened because of administrative issues and other things. There is low-hanging fruit that's out there, especially on health benefits. I mean, I hope I don't get a ticket while I'm driving home today. But some of that low-hanging fruit deals with our uniforms. That police officers or corrections officers, yes, important jobs. They can retire at 50 years old with a 65% pension and lifetime health benefits, and go out and get another job making a significant amount of money, and going to their employer and saying, hey, I don't need health benefits. That wasn't what our structure was set up to do. It was set up to be that, the teacher who retires in their early 60s, and maybe for a year or two, the state is the primary provider of health care. And then at 65, when they become Medicare eligible, the federal government takes over, and the state is the second one. Like I said, we have uniforms, and we have public employees that have done it, who retire at 50 years old and get state health benefits for 15 years. Full disclosure, yes, I retired at 50 years old. I took a massive penalty on my pension, but I got health benefits for me and my family for free until, and the state won't pick up. There is low-hanging fruit, but again, trying to take that on with the police unions is going to be very difficult. Trying to regionalize police forces is difficult. So it's leadership. It's leadership and the will to get it done. I believe what we need in New Jersey is a second-term governor who isn't looking to do anything else in their life, and a good deal of the legislature who's about to retire.
Let me throw a little extra gas on the fire. Since you raised the issue, Lori, of structural reform, I've been in New Jersey now for about 10 years. I still don't really understand why we have county government. And but if you look at your property tax statement, you'll see that a significant amount of your property tax dollar goes to support county government. And I know that I'm not the only person who's ever thought about this, but I can't help wondering whether or not we should either devolve more functions to the counties or get rid of them altogether. But whatever we're doing now doesn't seem to be optimizing our taxpayer dollars.
Andrew, I have been a long time advocate for that, about either give them more responsibility, countywide police forces, other things, or say, wait a minute, this isn't working at all.
Yeah. But that would be a big political and structural change.
Right, that's true. So the last topic to throw out there is, let's talk a little bit about what you think a Biden administration means for New Jersey future budgets. What do you think? I mean, obviously no one has a crystal ball. I think all our crystal balls broke a long time ago, back in March or April. But any ideas of what the results in New Jersey are?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that it's overall pretty good news for New Jersey, in that I think Biden is likely to be more empathetic with New Jersey with respect to mass transit, building the tunnel, the Amtrak tunnel to New York City. I think there's going to be more of an urban orientation in this coming administration, so therefore there's an increased likelihood of some forms of federal aid. But there is a risk here, Lori, and that is that first of all, given the fact that we still have divided politics and divided government, I caution against being too optimistic about the coming, change in administration. I think we should be very restrained. And the other is to recognize that he's going to be stepping into a situation where there are going to be countervailing pressures on him that may not allow him to be as responsive to New Jersey and other similarly situated states as he might want to be. So, but I'll leave it to the others to give a little bit more meat to that.
I think I would say that number one on the list is that we clearly will be in a better position on Gateway, on tunnel, whatever we want, whatever the newest tunnel is going to be. That in itself is going to, that's an insurance policy. Remember, that tunnel is an insurance policy. If now look, we've all talked about the nature of work changing. So, but that's a number one. But yes, Andrew is correct. As long as there's going to be a regulator on what he can do, and that regulator will be a Republican-controlled Senate, that some of the things that everybody was hoping for, gazillions of dollars of money to the states and everything like that, it's not going to happen. There will probably be some more stimulus than would have happened, with a Trump reelection. But who knows even that, what he would have done. But yeah, I think it's looking at and I think Andrew is correct. I mean, the countervailing, how does he govern? Does he push aside the bleeding heart liberal part of my party and basically says, yeah, you know what? I don't need you to pass things. It's easier for me to go because I have to compromise in the Senate anyway. It's easier for me to come over to get a couple moderate Republicans to help me pass my agenda in the House than having to go so far left for you. Because that may help a state like New Jersey. I mean, who knows what happens on the salt issue? I mean, that's not an issue for the state, but it's an issue for state government and its budget, but it's an issue for our taxpayers. But I think let's see what happens in the first, look, I think everybody still holds out hope that maybe there'll be a stimulus package before the end of the calendar year under this administration. Who knows what the current incumbent of the White House will do or not want to do. And then we move from there. But yeah, clearly it's going to be a positive. I mean, he has lived in our backyard for his entire life. So
yeah, there'll be, I think, a likelihood of greater investment in infrastructure of all kinds. But again, I would caution against expectations of blank check bailouts to state and local government. I don't think he'll have the political wherewithal to do that, even if he wanted to. And as a wise and experienced player in Washington, he may not even want to do that. He may know that may not be the right thing to do.
True, though and it's obviously late in the year for this at this point, but I still feel like the easiest path to another stimulus package is just to free up the CARES Act funds and remove all the guidance as to what it can be used for and just let it be used for whatever the state wants, inclusive of revenue loss, which, that would have to be done by 12/31. Maybe that happens in lame duck, but that's the easiest lift from okay, let's get more money and flexibility to the states and locals.
One of the reasons I'm disappointed that we did not use the federal facility for borrowing too is that we could have borrowed money, and who knows, during the Biden administration they might have decided to say, "Oh, well, way for us to help states is we're going to forgive a portion of that money we borrowed." That's now not even an option.
Maybe.
Or they could have stretched it out.
Yeah, or they could have stretched the loan payments out. Whatever, that is now no longer an option.
Right. I think none of us really knows what the likelihood of all of these things are. We can only guess, but it's really hard to know. It's hard to know how it's going to play out. It's hard to know what kind of support he's going to get even and how that's going to play out. One of the things with the taxes is if they do roll back some of the new things in the tax rules related to the state and local tax deductions for New Jersey residents, that would have a big impact. High income states where the residents are limited to $10,000 to deduct, I think that's playing against New Jersey. And if that does get changed, I think that will help us.
Yeah. So
Well,
just a couple comments there. One is it depends whether that's done in isolation or not. In isolation, it's pretty expensive. If it's as part of kind of rolling back the whole
That's true.
Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I think the numbers are, that the majority of people in New Jersey benefited from that package. I could be wrong, Andrew. You may have more up-to-date info on that. But the other is I'm kind of a heretic on this issue. I believe that that's a positive. The SALT cap is a positive to trying to rein in, to create an incentive to rein in state and local spending. It obviously hasn't worked yet in New Jersey, but I think long-term, that's one of the few kind of pressure points to do so.
Well, I would add to what Ford was saying by noting that, interestingly enough, the SALT deduction is really of most benefit to medium and high income families, homeowners. And so as Ford just noted, the job, the tax cuts that were passed in 2017 actually on average benefited more New Jerseyans. And if there may be a movement to restore full deductibility, but that's not going to be, frankly, a very progressive initiative.
Okay.
And it will also make it very difficult because if you give up that revenue, where do you make up for it? And I don't know where this president, the incoming president, will want to go in order to make that up. So my guess is that they tinker with it and they declare victory and then they divert our attention elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point, Andrew. About what would the governor of New Jersey feel about you can either have the SALT deduction returned, which means we're going to have a significant loss of revenue in the federal government, which means there's probably going to be no stimulus. Or would you rather have stimulus money coming in to support your budget and your programs, but keep the SALT deduction? You're right. Everybody have to realize this is a zero-sum game. You can't just decide, say, okay, yeah, we're going to do away with the SALT deduction and we're going to give $1 gazillion of stimulus aid. It's not. It can't work financially.
And again, the SALT deduction is actually targeted toward upper income families and households. So just people don't really want to focus on that, but that's in fact the truth.
Right. So you're saying it's got to come from somewhere, and that does make sense.
Yeah. It's also ironic. It's also ironic to note that we do cap property tax deductions at the state GIT level. So. I
know.
And just to follow up on what Ford said, I mean, look, in my opinion, yes, but this cap helps. It's going to as this cap stays in, more and more people will focus more on the property taxes in New Jersey and ask why their property taxes are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. No, that makes sense.
I can remember a number of years where the property tax bills went up by X, and somebody would say, well, 30% of it's being funded by the federal government anyway through your tax deduction. That's not there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it should cause, and going back to something we said earlier, the majority of money in New Jersey is not spent by state government. It's spent by K through 12, county government, and local government.
Right.
And we have an unusually heavy reliance on property tax for local government and education in this state.
Yeah.
Right. Well, this has been a great discussion. I thank you all for participating in it. I guess if anybody has any questions, they can send them our way, and we'll be happy to get back to you. But thanks a lot. I hope that this has been enjoyable to the participants as well as the people who have attended. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.